Welcome to Madlik. At Madlik, we like to light a spark or shed a little light on a Jewish text or tradition. And today, a day before the Passover Seder, we ask why. Why, if loving the stranger because you were a stranger in Egypt is such a seminal message repeated multiple times in the text of the Bible, why is the stranger, let alone loving the stranger, not mentioned in the Haggadah? So put away your chametz and fasten your seatbelts as we search for the stranger in the Seder.
A reaction to the Exodus, and we know that everything in the Torah is Zecher Liyetziat Mitzrayim. And if everything is Zecher Liyetziat Mitzrayim, so therefore, what's the focus? So the theme that appears more often than anything else in the Torah is remember the ger. So I think your premise is problematic. The idea that the ger is not mentioned, I don't think that's right. I think the ger is mentioned.
Again, I didn't quite get what are you saying that it's so obvious and it's so essential to the message that, like maybe Moses, it doesn't need to be mentioned?
Yeah, means the story itself is all about the stranger, but the Torah emphasizes the stranger throughout the rest of the Torah.
Okay, I think it's an interesting answer. To me, it doesn't satisfy unless the absence begs this discussion. And if the rabbis who in their wisdom have included so much in the Haggadah, in their wisdom said, if we don't mention it, Adam and Geoffrey in 2021 will definitely mention it because it's so blatantly missing. But I think that there are so many themes that are covered in the Haggadah. Praising God, being thankful, hakarat hatov, so many things. That
Moshe's not in the Haggadah either.
Moses.
Right, Moses isn't in the Haggadah. So when we start with what's missing in the Haggadah, there are a lot of things missing in the Haggadah. Why isn't Moses in the Haggadah?
Well, that would be a subject for a whole other discussion. And I think the question has been asked many times, and there were many answers. What surprised me was that when I asked my question of where is the stranger in the Haggadah, I couldn't find it have being asked that many other times. So let me kind of share with you some of the areas that we might be thinking about the stranger or the other, but as I was looking, didn't really fit the mark. Of course, we start the whole Seder by saying, anyone who is hungry, come and eat. Anyone who is in need, come and do the Seder with us. So there is the mention and the message of taking care of those who do not have. But again, to my mind, while a good discussion point, it's not quite the stranger, the other. And then, of course, we can go into the whole dialogue with the 4 children, both the wise and the evil, where they play with this word etchem, you, not me. And there is a big discussion. And of course, the reason the wicked is called wicked is because he is poresh min hatzibur. He separates himself. But there, the separation is in the other direction, where it's almost an elitism, or it's a personal kind of separation from the other. So I and again, all of those are very basic concepts that all of us had joy visiting as we go through the Haggadah. So I think my question still stands, Rabbi, because the discussion, the bringing up of the stranger, at least should have a hook. It should have a mention. It should have somewhere where we can all remember every year we discuss it. And I really do think that it's missing. And if there's anyone who is listening who has their own suggestion, because I do want to, I've spent a lot of time, it's actually been a year since I started thinking about that. I will suggest where the stranger is not only mentioned, but is actually the climax of the whole Haggadah. But before I do, I'd love to know if anyone out there, and you can just raise your hand, either feels that the question should be rephrased or has no basis, or feels that there is a place in the Haggadah where, in fact, either the stranger, the ger, the other, is either mentioned or at least can be mentioned by way of association. So I'm going to bring in Matt, who's a reliable contributor to this Madlik. Go ahead, Matt. What do you think?
Hi, all. Rabbi, great comments. Thank you. I'm sort of leaning with the rabbi here because we have a very modern sensibility. I'm reading Modeh Ani by Berman right now, that new book on biblical criticism that came out. And I just think that it's incredibly implied. None of the story makes sense if you don't then sort of self-reflect that it's we were the strangers and do unto others. So I don't have as much of a problem with it as you do. I understand you'd like it maybe spoon-fed a bit more. But yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Michael, how are you this week?
Hi, I'm good. I appreciated that you went to the 4 questions and to the boy who says about them and separates himself. For me, I'd like to also suggest that Eliyahu, we open the door to this unknown, but he does represent as I understand or remember, the messianic figure or key to the messianic age. And I would like to suggest that even though we left Egypt, we are still in the suffering, and Israel is still at war, and there's all kinds of separation in our Jewish people. They're not so cool about gays, and they're not so cool about not religious people, and they're just amongst the brothers of the Jews. So I think there is a stranger in the happy person, the person who's in the messianic age. It's like a stranger. I'm feeling that too, that we, as we leave Egypt or our enslavement, like I've never really been happy. And I realize that's the stranger in the strange land, is a person enters paradise and feels like a stranger.
Wonderful. Henry?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm not sure how important this part of the puzzle is to the Seder and to the whole notion of our redemption. It was our redemption that we're really talking about. It was our being brought out. Part of the puzzle is, yes, we need to be kind to the stranger, but that's not seminal, I don't believe, to the Passover story.
So I take your answer that while you admit it is one of the threads that certainly we can weave, and I think, Michael, you're right, it can be found in the Elijah. It's that the distance between the redeemed and the not yet redeemed, and we're all being not redeemed in a sense, is being the ultimate stranger, because ultimately if being redeemed is in some people's mind going back to Eden, in other people's mind going to a better place, we're not there. So we're wandering around as a stranger. But Henry, your thought is that it's a thread. It's not the seminal message. So I would like, to me, I really do feel it is not a modernistic concept. When you say 26 or 36 times, the Bible talks about taking care of the stranger, loving the stranger, and 5 times out of 10 makes the comparison to you being strangers in Egypt, that's not modernist. And I find it very difficult to read anything else into it. Then the bottom line is, you were slaves, so take care of the other slaves. It's a quid pro quo almost. When we get to Shabbat, we say, and remember, Shabbat was the first commandment that the Jews asked Pharaoh if they could observe. The root for the word Shabbat is the same root as used to strike, a shvita, someone who owns their own body, their own labor. And when we rest, our animals rest, everything rests, including the ger, including the non-Jew, including our servants. So I would like to suggest, and you're going to have to bear with me for a second here, that in fact, loving the ger and taking care of the stranger is actually the high point of the Seder narrative, the section called Magid, and that it was left out, and it was left out for a reason. So all of you will sit down tomorrow night, and at a certain point in time, you're going to come to a very strange verse that is going to talk about our forefathers being wandering Arameans. And the Mishnah is very short and sweet about what you need to do at the Seder. It says as follows. Number one, you have to talk to each person according to their own intellect. And that's why we have the 4 questions. And then it says you begin with shame and you conclude with praise. And it continues. And how do you do that? You start by expounding the verse in Deuteronomy, a wandering Aramean was my father, until you complete the whole section. Ad sheyigomer kol haparsha. What it is referring to is the section in Deuteronomy that by most scholars is extremely old and is one of the few prayers that the Bible actually tells us what to say. And it says, when you bring the first fruit, you shall recite as follows. And now I'm quoting from Deuteronomy. My father was a fugitive Aramean. He went down to Egypt with meager numbers and sojourned there. Was a stranger there. But there he became a great and very populous nation. The Egyptians dealt harshly with us and oppressed us. They imposed heavy labor upon us. We cried to the Lord, the God of our fathers, and the Lord heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. The Lord freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm, an awesome power, and by sign and portents. That is the verses in the Bible that we spend the most part of the Seder dissecting with a midrash. Every word there is provided a commentary. But if you recall, the Mishnah says you have to finish the whole section. And by stopping there, the rabbis cut out a very important part of this whole ancient prayer. Because in the next verse it says, he brought us to this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Wherefore I now bring the first fruits of the soil, which you, O Lord, have given me. You shall leave it before the Lord your God. So it doesn't continue to the next verse about coming into the land of Israel, and it doesn't continue to the next verse, which talks about the Bikurim, the fresh fruits that you are bringing. And most modern scholars say the reason why the rabbis left that out is because the Haggadah, for the most part, is a book written for and by the Galut, the exiled Jews. And to talk to an exiled Jew about that God took us out of Egypt and brought us into the promised land would be too much to bear. And that's why there's a whole discussion whether you have the 5th cup of wine, which talks about the verse that brought us into the land. And in Israel now, and on the early kibbutzim, when they rewrote the Haggadah, they included these verses, and they have a 5th cup of wine to bring us into the land. But wait a second. there's one more verse that the person bringing the fresh fruits would say. And even the Zionists, even the people that said the rabbis cut out this whole part of coming to the land of Israel, even they did not continue on to verse 11. And what does verse 11 say? And you shall enjoy, together with the Levite and the stranger in your midst, all the bounty that the Lord your God has bestowed upon you and your household. Va'ager asher b'kir bacha. That is the end of the chapter. You talk about taking Judaism seriously. You talk about listening to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, finish the whole parsha. And the whole parsha, the whole story of Magid ends with, and we came to this land and we share the fruits with the Levi, who, by the way, has no portion in the land, so he is landless, and the Ger, who is amongst us. And now we go back to the beginning of this declaration, and the beginning of the declaration literally talks about us being strangers, first by being Arameans and being in another country, and then when we were strangers in the land of Egypt. So I would argue that actually the whole declaration of Magid relates to this concept of the real challenge, the real message of the Seder is to remember that you were a stranger, to thank God for having heard your cry and listened to your sadness, for having brought you to your own land and giving you the self-respect of not a stateless person, but a citizen of Israel and of the world. And finally, here's where it goes from blame or shame to praise. It's shameful to be stateless. It's praiseworthy when you get your own state to love the stateless. And to me, that is the message of Magid. And there's a very good reason why for all these years, when the Haggadah belonged to a stateless people, we didn't go to step number 2 and talk about coming into the land. But even now that we've come into the land, the challenge is all still ours. And it doesn't matter whether you live in Israel or you are a fully vested citizen of the world. Now that we are, it's our turn. It's our turn to take care of the stranger. That, to me, is the message of Magid.
So, Geoffrey, I love that idea. I mean, you really turned it around to say, why is it missing? And no, it's not missing. It's actually the focus, the highlight. My question to you is, why do you think they don't say it explicitly? Why is it kind of in this, through the portion about Arame Obiravi? Why doesn't it just talk specifically about the stranger? Why do you think he does it in kind of this, veiled, mysterious way?
Well, I do think, and again, looking at the historical texts, we lost the stranger because we were stateless. And I think what I was trying to say last week as well is when we are stateless, all we can care about is the subjugation of the nations. But once we have a state, we can turn our attention to ourselves because we have now self-respect. So I think really the question is, we lost 2,000 years of this discussion when we were the stranger. I mean, come on, it's a little bit of a stretch to expect somebody huddled in a shtetl basement who's afraid at any moment that the pogrom might begin, for them not only to celebrate the return to the land of Israel, which was a very remote concept and idea, and also think about taking care of the stranger. So I think the reason why it lost out on 2,000 years of discussion like the ones we're having now is, again, this two-step kind of move, which is, first of all, they couldn't talk about the second half of the proclamation about having a state. And if you can't discuss the state, it's really a stretch to talk about taking care of the stranger amongst you when you are a vagabond yourself. That's my answer.
I like the answer, Jeff. I think it makes good sense. Thank you for sharing your thought process.
Great. Well, now we have Charles Stern.
Hey, Dad. I mean,
Okay.
just as a counter to that, because I hear you. On the one hand, it's inconsistent to say you have to care for the stranger when you're basically a stranger yourself. I mean, another theme through Pesach is that we're on the cusp of the redemption, right? Michael talked about Eliyahu Hanavi. We always end the Seder with Lashana Haba B'Yerushalayim. So, when we're redeemed, we will have our own state again, in which case we will have to be responsible for and take into heart, being kind to strangers.
Well, I couldn't agree more. And what I'm arguing is that it's time to follow the guidelines of the Mishnah, to read the parsha till the end, and to begin our own midrash of each word that relates to, and this is being done as we speak in Israel, to those two verses that talk about coming to the land. Israelis, both 40 years ago on the kibbutzim when they wrote their Haggadot, and today also are rewriting that part. But I just suggest that we follow the direction of the Mishnah and go till the end of the parsha, and also begin the discussion of, now that we are in power and not powerless, how do we go about getting to that place of shvach, of praise, where we have internalized. And, it's a real challenge. Rabbi Held spoke earlier this week about the challenge for the victim not to become a victimizer. And I think that maybe to me is also the lesson of from shame to praise, where those who live in shame, it's very difficult to get to that beautiful position when one is no longer ashamed, to treat others who are in your prior position with magnanimity and love. And that's what he talked about in terms of Hagar and Sarah. But I agree with you totally. And I think it's a very positive message. And it really opens us up to rewrite and relive the Passover story in our day, which is also what we're instructed to do. In every generation, one has to look at one's unique trip out of Egypt. And our trip today, and I'm not only talking about those living in Israel, but those living outside of Israel are citizens of the world, have full rights. So I think we agree. Well, this has been amazing. I wish everybody a wonderful Seder, and whether you add, subtract, or digress, as you discussed, the story of our people coming out of Egypt, just recognize that it's one of the most powerful stories ever told. It lives throughout the generations, and that we have to make it our own and take from it the nurturing and the energy that we all so desperately need. So Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach, and see you all next week on Madlik at 4:00 on Friday.
Fantastic. See you next week, Geoffrey. Thank you for your beautiful insight. Chag Sameach, everybody. Enjoy. Bye-bye.
Chag Sameach.